Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I'm your host, Meg Reynolds, and happy Women's History Month. Every year I do an episode discussing Women's History Month and themes around it, giving you guys book recommendations and just honoring the women who have come before me, who've come before you, who have paved the way for me to be able to do what I'm doing, you do whatever you're doing. And I think now more than ever, it is so important that we continue to have these discussions and honor the people who started all this work, because as much as women have come so far, we have not come far enough. And a lot of the liberties that women have gotten have been so recent in history. And I just think it's really important. But today's episode, talking about Women's History Month, and I'm going to be talking about this subject all month long, but today I don't want to just focus on the atrocities that are happening against women and, talking about the patriarchy. We are going to discuss those things, but I want to start the conversation by asking you guys the same question I posed to myself, which is, what is womanhood? And I'm not saying what is a woman, because I know that question is so politicized and people love to define it as biological, but then that excludes trans women. Like, womanhood itself, the feeling of being a woman. And I posed the question to myself that way because I think it's actually a lot more impactful to define what womanhood looks like to each and every one of us. And I don't think there is, one right answer. For everybody listening, I want you to consider, what was the first moment that you felt like you were experiencing what it means to be a woman? Was it a moment? Was it really when you got your first period? Was it a heartbreak? Was it a responsibility you had to carry? Was it an experience you went through with other women? And really reflect on what it is that womanhood means to you. And I ended up writing something in my journal that I wanted to share with you guys to kind of start the episode on this conversation. So, I don't know what made me a woman, but I know part of being a woman is having to go through things to make us strong, but temporarily we are weakened. In the meantime, while we're weak, we're protected by our fellow women. That to me is womanhood. It's the friend you call crying over the boy who broke your heart, the same friend you beat a dead horse with again and again and again. Historically, it's the women who helped you hide the body of your dead husband because you couldn't take the beatings anymore. Because let's be real, yes, that happened. It's the ones who brought and still bring hot meals after births and after deaths. Women have always shown up, men have not. So many women have spent their lives being mothers even though they've never had children. And let's be real, women mother their partners so often, that's actually why we feel guilty leaving, because it's like you're abandoning your own child. But it's never been, never was, never should have been your job. If we as women could collectively change men and make them better for the next girl, there would be better men. We wouldn't be having these conversations. Womanhood isn't just about buying ourselves flowers, because now we can do that because we have our own money. We're also buying ourselves houses now, though. We're buying ourselves freedom. And I can't define womanhood for anybody else, but I can tell you for certain that my value and your value as a woman are not determined by the amount of suffering you have had. Womanhood is not about suffering, as we have so often been taught. Whew. So that's just a little snippet of what I wrote, but I want us to remember that while this is my view of womanhood, and there's so much more I wrote in that passage of talking about my experiences of womanhood that maybe I'll share throughout this episode, maybe I won't. But I want you to remember that this episode is not about truly defining womanhood and creating a definition of it, because we can't define it for anybody else. But this episode is about exploring what womanhood means through our lived experiences. I think so much of history, womanhood has been defined by the amount of suffering a woman has gone through and how much she has endured. And that should not be solely what womanhood is about. Women should not be expected to suffer, especially at the hands of men. And so often women are the glue that hold families together, that hold households together. And yet that is often met with disdain and being undermined and weaponized of their contributions to a household. And I think for me, the clearest metaphor for that will always be a scene from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. If you've never seen that movie, I highly recommend you watch it. It is one of my favorite all-time classic comfort movies. But there's a scene in that movie where the mom tells her daughter Tula that the man may be the head of the household, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the head any way she wants. And that metaphor always has stuck with me growing up, and it's always stuck with me, the imagery behind it, because it's such a great symbolic thing of how men love to appear to be the ones in positions of power, but behind the scenes, women are doing so much more than they are given credit for. And I think that is such a great metaphor too of just what patriarchy is in general. And with that too, a lot of the times men are positioned to be the heads of the household because they need to protect the women, right? But here's the problem, is that men's protection is not absolute. It is not unconditional, because a lot of the times, one, men are protecting women from other men. And two, that protection no longer applies when suddenly it's your friend. It's a guy you know. Oh, he's my bro. He would never do something like that. You're just crazy. You're just jealous. Why should we believe you? Like, the protection goes away when suddenly a man's character is called into question. We're seeing that happen in real time with everything going on in the Epstein files and the way this country is actively protecting pedophiles. And I think that is why it is so important that we are having these conversations, because silence is an oppressor's greatest weapon. When you go silent, you are no longer fighting back. You may not agree with it, but silence is what allows atrocities to continue to happen. So by using your voice and having these conversations and bringing awareness, that is how change happens. Men want women to be silent and stop complaining and stop nagging, because they don't want to make changes that would hinder their own comforts. And this is why I say womanhood is not about suffering, and the price of womanhood is not suffering, and that the cost of femininity is not struggle. Like, so much of my existence too, when I reflect on everything, has been defined by the struggles I've gone through and the pains I've gone through at the hands of men. And if you are a man listening to this, at this point in the conversation, you're probably starting to shut down. You may start feeling defensive. You may start feeling like your ego is being threatened. And if that is the case, now more than ever, I think this is a conversation that you need to be listening to, because your manhood is not being called into question by me acknowledging all of these things. All right. I think that so many men get threatened by these conversations because it feels like a personal attack. And the thing is, it's not a personal attack. When you are feeling defensive about these conversations, it's because you have centered yourself as an individual and you're unable to put yourself in the shoes of others, specifically women, even though you may be the guy that was raised by a single mom, or you have two younger sisters that you feel very protective over. And that's the thing too about men, is that their respect for women, they're not raised for that respect to be unconditional. And I'm going to touch on that more in a minute, but I want to steer the conversation back to what womanhood is about. It's, womanhood is not defined by the amount of pain you go through in your life. So many women I hear when they get married, it's like, well, that's just marriage, or he's just a man. Like, we make excuses for these men at our own cost. The cost is our sense of self. The cost is our sanity. The cost is our peace in our hearts. And yet we're going to keep making these excuses because we live in a patriarchal system. And speaking of living in a patriarchal system, for the men that are still listening, this piece of the conversation I know is going to be very uncomfortable, but it is so important, because I don't think women pander to the gaze of men as much as men do. Men do things for the approval of other men, more so, I would argue, than women. Think about it. Your gym physique, your gym bros. A lot of the times, the guys aren't posting those thirst traps for women. They're posting them for the approval of other men. The social currency in dating for men is how hot your girlfriend is, not defined by how compatible you actually are and how much you love her. It's, do my boys approve of her? Do they think she's hot enough for me? Did I go out of my league? The whole version of modern masculinity is a performance for male approval. Think about it, like this whole alpha male provider mindset, the bravado, the like arrogance that comes with it. None of that is what women want. Women are screaming from the rooftops that that is what they don't want in a man. And yet men are still pushing this idea and this notion that, no, this is what it means to be a man. This is what masculinity looks like. This is how you get the girl. No, it's not. And men are not listening to women. Instead, we're being told our standards are too high. We're nagging. We're not worth it. We're gold diggers. We're this, we're that, the other thing. All because you're listening to some red pill gym bro on the internet who probably has never actually touched a woman in his goddamn life. Men pander to the gaze of other men more so than they pander to the gaze of women. And this is why you say, like when we read leading characters in books or we see them on TV, women go, oh yeah, that's a man written by a woman because this is what women actually want. And if men put their own egos aside for 2 seconds to understand that women are not trying to attack them, they're trying to lead them into the modern world with us and show them what, hey, this is what masculinity and being a provider means to us now. Don't get me wrong. There are some women that still say he needs to be 6 feet tall, make 200K, blah, 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 blah. Those are women who are still struggling with their own internalized misogyny and really struggling at the hands of the patriarchy. But patriarchy harms us all. It doesn't just harm women. It harms all communities, all people. Like under a patriarchal system, there is no equality. And on this topic of conversation, if you are a man listening to this and a woman in your life is having these conversations with you and your immediate gut reaction is to say, well, there are certain double standards that benefit women and blah, 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 women this, women that, women can do this and men can't do that. Stop. 2 things can be true at once, that there are absolutely double standards that do benefit women, and acknowledging that bringing those topics up is harmful to the conversation at hand because you are then still invalidating women's experiences. So I can't tell you how many times when I have talked about my experiences with men that the men I am talking to about these things shut down and go, well, it's not all men. I'm not like that. Cool. I never said you were like that, but the fact that you felt so defensive by me sharing my experiences with men and you felt the need to defend yourself shows that you probably have more of the tendencies that I am discussing than you want to admit to yourself, because no one wants to admit they're that guy, right? And this is why I say too, when guys love to call themselves the nice guy and why women see that as a red flag, a nice guy is just that. He's just nice. He doesn't need you to acknowledge his niceness. If you're the guy that wants to bring a girl flowers on a first date, great. You are above the curve, but you do not need to be asking for extra praise for that. And if the woman still rejects you after that date, you can't be shutting down and saying, well, that's what I get for being the nice guy. Just be the nice guy. That's it. Just be that nice guy and the right woman will appreciate it. But if you are only being the nice guy with the expectation that you're going to get something out of it, then you are not as nice as you think you are. Men are taught to laugh when their guy comments on a girl's body, calls her a slut, makes disgusting remarks about her, says in the locker room, oh, well, we have to invite the women's team too. It would only be fair. And everyone laughs and it's just a joke. Men are taught that respecting women is conditional. It's not unconditional. You're raised to respect your mom, your grandmother, your sisters. You're raised to be a polite gentleman to the girl you're trying to date. But here's the thing. If you only respect women when they're family and you only respect women when you are attracted to them and you you only respect women when they're in the room, and you say some nasty shit behind closed doors, you don't respect women. That's not what respecting women is. Your value as a man, I don't want to say your value. Your character as a man is determined by the way you speak about women behind closed doors, not just when there's cameras in your face. Your character as a man is defined by how you treat women and how you defend women when they are not in the room. That tells me so much more about a man than what he says to my face. Because we all know a man will say some shit to your face and then he'll turn around and lie 2 seconds later. And this is why when I'm dating, I pay attention to the men that the guy I'm interested in surrounds himself with, specifically how they talk about women. Because here's the thing. If I'm hearing some gross misogynistic shit coming out of their mouths when I'm in the room, but my man isn't, he's maybe telling them to knock it off, or he's not engaging in that conversation, but he's in the same room, makes me wonder what he's like when I'm out of the room, because that's his true character. Locker room talk, and specifically what happened with the US men's hockey team at the Olympics, is the perfect example of the divide amongst men and women these days. And here's the thing too, when it comes to raising men, is it's not even entirely the parents' fault. Like, yes, it is. But at the same time, we also have to look at the role models that are being uplifted in the media. Look at who is literally sitting in the highest seat of power in this country, one of the most powerful seats of the world. Like, look at the men who are being spotlit and uplifted and made to be role models for young men. Young men these days don't have great role models the way that young women do. They don't have men who are making change in a positive way, in a non-harmful way to women. It's a systemic problem across the board. And it goes so much deeper than just what goes on at home. And if there are still men listening who have not turned this off and rolled their eyes at me and said I'm just some woke liberal feminist, I want you to understand that I get how uncomfortable doing this work can be, and it should be, and will be. Straying from the approval of your peers is going to be uncomfortable. It may lead you to be ostracized. However, your future wife will thank you. Your future daughters will thank you. Society will thank you. You will be so much better of a person for it, because again, when you no longer center yourself as an individual, like patriarchy also teaches us to do, I think you are able to have a much better worldview and better connect with others. Because here's the other thing about patriarchy. I think womanhood is all about being whimsical, and it's, women are the creators of life. Women are the reason for life literally being brought into this world. Yes, we know it takes two to tango, but women are the one who do that hard labor for 9 months and then do the literal labor. So womanhood is all about, to me, is all about whimsical. It should be light and airy and full of love. And patriarchy does, I think, rob us of that whimsy. And that's why I think today women being authentically themselves is such a radical thing, because to put it in the words of Toni Morrison, this quote always sticks with me, is Toni Morrison said, the best thing she was her. Patriarchy doesn't want women to be their authentic selves. It doesn't want them to have their own unique identities and thoughts and stories. Patriarchy wants us all to fall in line. And feminism is about systemically dismantling those systems. And that's why I say patriarchy robs all of us of our whimsy, because as much as patriarchy doesn't want women to have their own unique identities, it doesn't want men to either. Men also suffer under the hands of patriarchy. Women are just the ones with their boots on the ground, doing the hard work, trying to bring awareness, because men do have a lot more benefits under these systems than women. Are there double standards? Absolutely. However, systemically, men tend to benefit more. In this time more than ever, it is so, so important that we acknowledge Women's History Month. We hear the stories of women. And I know the crowd loves to say, everything is so political nowadays. Not everything is political. Absolutely. Art is political. Everything is political, especially now more than ever, because we still live in a time where guns are less regulated than women's bodies. You have 2 states that just introduced bills for life in prison and the death penalty for abortion, which is normal healthcare. And yes, and I'm not saying you have to like abortion. I'm not saying you have to agree with abortion. I am not saying you have to get one yourself. However, it is not your say to say what a woman can and cannot do with her body. I'm not arguing the moral and ethics of it. I'm not arguing whether or not you think a fetus is a life. I am arguing for the sake of women, because pregnancy is such a unique experience to women. And every woman's pregnancy is different. And the choice of having an abortion, whether the child was wanted or not, there's so many reasons women get abortions, more so than just, I'm not ready to have a baby. To boil down such a complex topic as this to those very simple ideals is such harmful black and white thinking that this is why we still have Women's History Month, because we are actively seeing all the work be unraveled in real time. As it is, women's health in general is so understudied, it's underfunded. Women weren't even included in medical studies until the 90s. They were excluded from studies. Even things, and like, you want to sit here and say that all of these things aren't political, but when you start doing the research, I mean, like, I was even reading an article about women's running sneakers, how women's running sneakers aren't structured and designed based on a woman's physiology and her body. They took a men's sneaker and just shrunk it down and made it into a woman's. And it's only just now that companies are starting to study women's bodies and make running shoes for women's bodies. And even something as simple as running shoes, we don't have. Like, this is what I'm saying. It all really is that deep. When you're hearing these things, it makes you feel helpless, right? You're like, how can I possibly change any of this? You can't. There's a lot that's out of control, and I can't even change it. But you know what makes me feel a little bit better? And you know what makes me think I'm helping a little bit? Having these conversations, reading, talking to whoever will listen to me about these things. Because again, the more collective voices come together, that's when change starts to happen. We've seen it. Women's suffrage. That was all about women's voices coming together for an issue. Conservative narratives continue to rise because as women are liberated, men tend to become more conservative because they feel their own masculinity is threatened. This is why celebrating Women's History Month is still so important. And that leads me to, what is feminism, right? Feminism is a word that carries such weight to it, carries so much stigma to it. And in researching this episode, I did a lot of reading on what feminism actually is, because there's a phrase called choice feminism, which is also known as white woman's feminism. And growing up, I thought that's what feminism was. It was about women having the freedom to choose whatever life they want. If they choose a traditional lifestyle, they are free to do that. If they want to never have children, they're free to do that. That it's all about women having the ability to choose. But from my own reading, I've come to understand that choice feminism actually can be harmful to the feminist movement, because feminism itself is not about one's individual choices. It's not about centering the individual at all. It's a political movement. Feminism is not about hating men, as so many people often think it is. Feminism at its core is simply about three pillars: equality, autonomy, and dignity. It's about the collective liberation from patriarchal systems for everybody, men included, everybody freeing, like, that's what it's about. And so when women say that they're not feminists, I understand where that sentiment comes from, because I think a lot of people think feminism is simply about hating men. No, that's misandry. And we're going to touch on that in a minute as well. But feminism, I always love to say that women can post that opinion online of I'm not a feminist because of feminism. And that's not just some catchy buzz phrase. Like, it really is true that the work that's been done so far is the reason that women have bank accounts, can vote. It's the reason we can own homes, have our own car. It's the reason that you can choose or choose not to have children, get married, buy into these systems. Like, women, even those women do benefit from those systems. And I think a lot of women, myself included, are still unpacking a lot of internalized misogyny and confronting all these things. And I'm not perfect either. Like, prime example is plastic surgery is not feminist. I have filler, I have Botox, like none of those, like, there's so many choices that women still make, shaving my armpit, like, these are how much of it is because you want to do it versus how much of it is you feeling like you have to do it. And I'm not saying I got Botox and filler because I felt like I have to. I wanted to. However, I'm also recognizing that I'm trying to adhere to beauty standards set by the patriarchy. And you see how it's this weird mind fuck, right? You're like, well, wait a minute. Like, no one is ever going to be perfect. And I think this is why it's so important to just even have these conversations, like spirited conversations, not attack, not degrade and demean. I think it's so easy to call other women a pick-me bitch and degrade them on the internet and be like, oh, did he choose you yet? Like, I know I've said that, but that's not helpful, because you can't, it's been so ingrained in all of us. Like, you can't judge a woman for where she's at in her own journey of uncovering all of this. However, you can acknowledge the way that she is actively harming other women by pressing these ideals. And that's why I'm saying choice feminism can actually be harmful to the feminist movement because of the way it centers the individual. Because the choices that women make aren't inherently feminist simply because they're a woman making that choice. There's systemic and structural inequalities that lead women to make the choices that they do, and they lead people to make the choices that they do. But here's the thing, and this is what people get confused, is that feminism is not about a woman's choices, but women have the ability to make choices because of feminism. And that is the difference, and that is the thing you have to remember about feminism. And this is still a topic that I'm learning more about, reading more about, and it fascinates me, the socioeconomic, political impacts that feminism has and the way patriarchy impacts all these things. Like, it really is something that's been so fascinating to learn about and very eye-opening to learn about. And with that piece, talking to you about the internalized misogyny, is I used to be a very male-centered woman. This podcast was born out of that place and that time in my life of coming out of a relationship and being like, I need to put an end to this. And, I thought, I really bought into the whole system. I thought I was going to get married to my college sweetheart. And by now I would have bet money that we're married or getting married, maybe have a kid on the way. Like, I'm 27 now. Like, that was all I thought my life was going to be about. That's what I thought life itself was about. And through my own therapy journey, not only have I recognized that those aren't things I wanted in my life, but I've also confronted my own male-seeking behaviors, attention-seeking behaviors, confronted my hypersexuality from sexual trauma. And one of the best things to come out of that is I had to recognize that male lust and male attention is not the compliment that I was raised to think it is. I no longer get excited when a man texts me asking what I'm doing tonight, because I know what he actually is after. And I'm listening not just to what they're saying, but how they're saying it. And there's something so freeing about realizing you're not special to a man, that you're just a warm body that he wants in his bed that night. And when you really pay attention to how men talk about women in their lives and the way they act towards them, like, I'm just so unimpressed with a lot of these men these days. And that leads me to talking about misogyny versus misandry. And here's the key difference. Misogyny results in violence. Misogyny is systemic, it's cultural, it's historically embedded in men. And misandry is a reaction to that misogyny. It's not an institutionalized system. It's a individual dislike and distrust of men. And misogyny, we've seen it. It's the red pill movement. And, now people are calling misandrist femcells, and it's just not the same thing, because misogyny results in the deaths of women. Misandry does not do the same thing. And I'm sure there are women that call for violence towards men. They're out there, but it's not in the same way as misogyny. It's not such a large movement. Again, we are seeing all the effects of misogyny play out in real time. Look at the Epstein files. Open your freaking eyes. Like, our president is literally a pedophile. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that at this point. And, every woman, if she says she's a misandrist or she hates men, there is a story and a valid reasoning accompanying that. My own story goes back to when I was 16 years old. And I don't identify as a misandrist, but I inherently have a natural distrust towards men, and I'm very sensitive to the way men behave towards me. And it all goes back to this moment. And I don't think I've ever told this story on the podcast, but as you guys know, if you've been here for a little while, I'm going to issue a trigger warning right now, actually, before I tell this story. So be warned, I'm going to talk about some really hard subjects here. If you have listened to the podcast for a while, you know that when I was 16, I was sexually assaulted by my boyfriend in my bedroom. And for the past decade, almost 11 years now, that's stuck with me. That's something that changes you forever. And the amount of women I know that have stories similar to mine is heartbreaking. But it wasn't just the assault that made me have a distrust towards men. No, we're going to fast forward to the summer of 2019. I was entering my senior year of college, and I just broke up with my longtime boyfriend. And I went to the bar with my friends. Yes, I was underage. whatever. We're not going to talk about that. But I was at the bar with my friends, and sure enough, my ex showed up. I had not seen him since he showed up at my job a month after the assault, trying to talk to me, wouldn't talk to him. So I hadn't seen him in nearly, at that point, 4 years about. My friends were telling him to leave me alone because it turns out the people I had become friends with, he ran in like the other half of the friend group. And so after that happened, he would come around and I would always just keep my distance. And so when I saw him at the bar, he kept trying to talk to me, and my best friend, he was like, dude, drop it, leave her alone. She doesn't want to talk to you. Cause I had told him at that point what happened. And, at one point he comes up to me and he's like, I don't understand why you hate me. We didn't even date that long. And I looked him in his eyes and I said, because you assaulted me in my bedroom. And this man went white as a ghost. And you could tell that to him, it was just another night. And to me, it was something that changed the trajectory of my entire life. And he was just so confused. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, da-da-da. I go, I kept telling you no. I kept saying I don't want to. And then I kept telling you no, and you kept pressuring me until you grabbed me. And you could see in that moment, like, I'll never forget the look on his face and the way he just was thinking and thinking and thinking and trying to talk his way out of it. And then what he said next, I can't help but laugh at how ridiculous it was. But he literally thanked me for not pressing charges against him. My attacker, my ex, thanked me for not pressing charges after he sexually assaulted me. And I looked at him and I felt so vindicated in that moment because he didn't continue to try and defend himself. He basically admitted it. And I said to him, I was like, if I had had any ounce of proof, I would have done something. And I said to him, if I ever hear another girl come forward and accuse you, I will be right there beside her to corroborate her story. And I never spoke to him again after that. And I never heard from him again after that. He dropped it, never tried to speak to me again when he was around. And it was not long after that everybody in that group dropped him. But I'll never forget that, because what do you mean you can sit there and acknowledge what you did to me and have the nerve to thank me for not ruining your life? But you had no problem ruining mine. But the thing is, he didn't ruin it. It's just a piece of my story. And, it's something that happened. And unfortunately, it was bound to happen statistically. But that's just my story of why I have a natural distrust towards men. Like there's so many women who have a story similar to mine. And it's really just sad. And a piece of that too is after it happened, about 6 months later, I was totally shut down. I was 16 and I was still processing everything that happened. It was the fall of my senior year of high school. And I remember I had confided in a friend at the time, and she told her boyfriend about it. Her boyfriend knew my ex from baseball. I was in last period of my AP Lit class, and he's blowing up my phone saying that I'm a liar, that he's going to call the cops, that I'm not telling the truth. And I broke down crying in my AP Lit. And at that point, I hadn't really told anybody about it. I had only told that like a handful of friends, including her. And I was still processing and I didn't fully understand it. And so of course my AP Lit teacher is like, what the fuck is happening? Why is she having like a panic attack in our class? And so I had to go down to the guidance office and talk to the guidance office about all this. And I didn't want to come forward yet. I didn't want to tell my story. And at that time, I guess they were mandated. Looking back, I don't understand how they didn't have to call the police unless that wasn't a law at the time. But they said they were going to have to call my mom. And I was like, can you please just let me do it? And so they agreed that I could be the one to tell my mom. So go home. It's the weekend of my 17th birthday. I had my 17th birthday party. I had all my friends, but the whole night I was so anxious and just upset and I couldn't enjoy it. And afterwards I set my mom down. The funniest part of all of this is my mom thought I was going to tell her I was a lesbian, which I am not, but she was like, it's okay. I still love you. Like, she just jumped to that conclusion because I was so serious, and I love her for that. Like, thanks, Mom. But no, I had to tell my mother that her 16 at the time, her 16-year-old daughter was sexually assaulted in her bedroom. And that was not a fun conversation. That was a really shitty birthday. But all that to say, like, that's also part of why, because I told all of my girlfriends immediately believed me. One of the few men who knew immediately didn't believe me simply because he knew the guy. And like, that is just a perfect summary of what women go through when they share their experiences. And a piece of this conversation too, you know, the stereotype then also turns to, oh, it's always the girls with daddy issues, right? And here's the thing about the phrase daddy issues too, is it's used as a negative against women, and yet it's actually a phrase that describes the failings of men. And that's just also a perfect summary of what women experience in a patriarchal society. But I read this article in The Atlantic called The Father-Daughter Divide. And well, it's not explicitly about shitty dads, but it was a really fascinating read because it described so much of what I've been through with my own father, and talking about the emotional gap between fathers who raise daughters. Because again, historically, just like romantic relationships were out of obligation, securing a woman's future and financial safety, that's what the father's role was. It was to facilitate those matches, and it was to put the roof over her head and have her financially secure until he passed her off to another man. That's all father-daughter relationships were. He was basically a security guard and a bank. That's all it was. And so now that that's not the case anymore, and the relationships have shifted to women, to daughters wanting emotional closeness with their fathers, a lot of men, they don't know how to achieve that. They don't know how to give that. And so it's another fascinating piece of feminism and just this conversation in general, because women's autonomy didn't just affect romantic relationships and their love lives. It affected their relationships with their father. And I've experienced this firsthand. And for the longest time, again, part of womanhood, you're taught to suffer, you're taught to keep the peace, you're taught to not talk out of turn. And so I think that's why for so long, women just didn't say anything to their fathers. They didn't try. They just accepted that this is who he is who he is, and you just have to live with it. And that's the story and the rhetoric so many women are taught to accept. It's like ingrained in our brain. Woman 101, you just have to take the man as he is, and that's how he is. But I refused to accept that. And my therapist helped me not accept that. And through that, as you guys know, I've had so many wonderful conversations with my dad. And when I saw him, he literally said, I enjoyed listening to you because now I feel like I really know you. That means my father was a staunch Republican growing up, so conservative, like typical ex-military guy, loves this country. And the fact that we can now have these open conversations, and he can see the world as it is and see the experiences that women go through. And he's even changed the way he speaks about women, because I've confronted him about that as well. And I'm just so proud to be his daughter, because I think he is one of the few men that's doing that work. And I'm surprised by it, happily surprised by it. But of course, he still has a long way to go. He's not perfect, never going to be perfect. And part of it is accepting that he may never be fully the man that, whatever, but he's doing a lot of the work, and that goes so much further than he realizes. For dads listening out there, if you feel like you're not close with your daughter and you feel like you can't connect with your daughter, I would argue that you already know what it is she needs, and she has told you what she needs, and you just haven't listened. Most daughters, all they want from their fathers is a willingness to reflect, a willingness to hear them out, and emotional closeness. I don't want to be told to toughen up. Sometimes I want to cry. That's it. And again, if you are a father, it can be really difficult to hear that, because again, then it's an own ego death in a sense, because you're having to confront these things. But I would really encourage you to listen, because especially if you voted a certain way for this presidency, because then you voted for systems that continue to harm your own daughter. And I have people in my life who voted that way, and I'm very disappointed in them. And we've had those conversations, and some of them agree with me, some of them don't. And that's okay. We've done a lot of talking here, and I hope you guys have been able to reflect on what womanhood is to you. But girlhood to womanhood, the lives that women experience are so complex. Women themselves are so complex, and no two experiences are unique. But, I think it's so important for us as women to define what is femininity, what it means to be a woman, what you want your womanhood to look like. Girlhood is about curiosity. It's about imagination. It's about softness. It's innocence. And I think it's so important we bring some of those elements into womanhood, because so much of our womanhood is defined by our resilience, our ability to protect ourselves, But I think at its core, womanhood should just simply be about choosing yourself and choosing to be your authentic self. And I think that's the only piece of choice that is not harmful to feminism, because when you lean into, you tap into here and you're able to have that clear relationship with yourself, you're able to clearly have then these conversations. And I wasn't even able to have these conversations until I dismantled my own internalized misogyny. I decentered men from my life. And I really got clear about what it is I want to define me and what pieces of my identity I want to share with the world. And I think that is a really special thing about being a woman, is how complex we are. So womanhood isn't about your suffering. It's not about being silent. It's not about being chosen by men. It's not about shrinking yourself for the comfort of those around you. Womanhood is first and foremost, to me, always about women showing up for other women. And I think that is so much of what defines womanhood, is how you show up for the women in your life. Womanhood, that's what it's always been about. And I can't define what it means to be a woman for you. I can't define what womanhood should look like in your life. But what I can tell you is that your worth as a woman is not determined by how much pain you endured. And enduring more and suffering more does not make you any more of a woman than the person sitting beside you. Being a woman is such a complex thing. Again, there are things that I experience that a trans woman will never experience, and vice versa. There are experiences and liberties that I get as a cis woman that they will never get. And, it's not a competition. We can always, I think the thing too about being a woman is, while it's not about our pain that we've endured, is women are survivors. And we know how to make something out of nothing. And so we can make a table bigger. We can add extra chairs to that table. There is plenty of room at the table for all of us women. We don't need to be competing with each other the way that we do, especially for the attention of a man. Like, that is for certain. So this is probably just the first of many episodes I will do on Women's History Month, on patriarchy, on misogyny, and all these topics. I'm still learning and growing, and I hope I did a good job in this episode explaining all these things and kind of just, I feel like I only scratched the surface and there's so much more I can say, but I want to make sure I thank the women in my life who I thank the women in my life who have held me up when I couldn't hold myself up. So thank you. And to the women who listen to this podcast, thank you. You have continued to help uplift my voice. And I hope I have, given you guys a sense of comfort. And I hope that you reflect on your own identity as a woman in your journals and your notes app, whatever it is. Obviously, if you are not a part of the Snail Mail Club, I would really encourage you to sign up, especially if these are topics that you're very interested in. This month's Snail Mail is all about Women's History Month and being a woman, and the journal prompts are going to be exploring that. So make sure you sign up for that, and I will make sure. And so, yeah, the Snail Mail Club, the Tough Love Club, it's a monthly dose of hello. So the Snail Mail Club, it's your monthly dose of tough love. The Snail Mail Club is your monthly dose of tough love. The podcast is your weekly dose of tough love. And that was all for this week's episode of Not the Girl Next Door. Make sure you leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, again, whatever platform you're choosing to listen on. And sign up for the Tough Love Club. And I will see you guys next week for another episode. Bye for now.